My name is Pastor Wilbert Miller, and I served as pastor of Augustana Lutheran Church from 1982 to 1995.
My name is Dagmar Miller. My husband was a pastor at Augustana Lutheran Church.
I'm Fred Bowell. I've been at Augustana Lutheran Church since January of 1988.
Pastor Miller, his wife Dagmar, and longtime church member Fred Bowell remember the 80s at Augustana. There were wonderful times, as well as some difficult ones.
But there was a hysteria, and it was not only HIV/AIDS, it was also, at that point, gay. I mean, that's the term that was used, gay. It was not gay, lesbian, queer, transgender. Those were not terms. It was gay.
During the 80s, many in the gay community were shunned after the discovery of AIDS.
It's mysterious, it's deadly, and it's baffling medical science. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome.
AIDS seemed to target homosexual men, leaving them ostracized around the country, but not at Augustana, the church embracing the very sick and very scared community, while leading a movement of understanding, education, and acceptance.
I remember the first hospital visit I made, and I was in booties and gloves and robe. It was an unknown to many of us, I think, at that point. What was this?
Of course, there were friends that were affected, and it was very, very personal. And I believe for a lot of them, we were their family.
In 1987, Pastor Miller wrote an article in The Lutheran, a national magazine, explaining the church has a mission to AIDS victims. In it, he remembers an Augustana parishioner, grateful for the Reverend's kind words and handshake. Few people wanted to touch AIDS patients in those days. The pastor was often dealing with the diagnosis of death. He recalled another young man during the 100th anniversary celebration in February 2019.
I remember a young man coming to that service saying to me, "Pastor Miller, I have decided what will be on the plaque in the cemetery. Now I'm looking for a church where I can be buried."
I knew that if he was addressing AIDS issue at a congregational level, I knew that I was, as a gay person, safe.
Fred Bowell has been a member at Augustana ever since. In fact, he met his husband at the open and welcoming church. He remembers well Augustana deciding to make a panel for the National AIDS Quilt as a way to cope and show support.
We had so many people in our parish that had died that we wanted, and we had family and friends that had died, that we wanted a way of memorializing them, and nobody in this community was untouched.
We wanted to say something like, this is a church, this is a community that supports this, that feels terrible, that doesn't know what to do with all our thoughts or worries. We asked people to bring in different materials. We didn't want your basic white or beige, we wanted it colorful. So I remember specifically that we took an old chasuble and cut it apart to get the crosses that are on the sides. And the background was a purple silk. So it was very churchy, as, you know, it made a statement as that. And then the multitude of colors and different materials that came in, and they lay in the form of hands. And the center part is the cross. That was sewn on.
There was an opening in the cross in which names of people for whom people wanted to pray, who were suffering from AIDS, could do. And then fabrics used in the AIDS panel were fabrics from loved ones.
Roy Lanzano, Larry Spivey.
The Augustana panel was one of 2,000 that made up the AIDS quilt, unveiled on the National Mall in October 1987.
And then seeing it down in its full capacity in the midst of the epidemic.
We gathered at our panel and began to pray. And it was a small, it wasn't maybe 10, 15 people, members, friends of Augustana. All of a sudden, there's this group of people surrounded by us who wanted to pray. And then that quilt also led to having a healing service here at Augustana that Sunday. We didn't quite realize, but we were kind of billed as the healing service for that weekend. It was an incredibly moving day. So many people from around the country who came into this church and were welcomed.
Welcoming. It's who Augustana is. The AIDS outreach of the 80s gave way to a strong support of the LGBTQ community in the decades after, becoming Reconciling in Christ in 1989, welcoming of all sexual orientations and gender identities, making annual trips to D.C.'s Pride Parade, performing same-sex marriages starting in 2009, in 2012, proposing and forming Lutheran Grace with other D.C. area Lutherans, a group aimed at ending the stigma of AIDS by generating information at a booth at the International AIDS Conference in Washington, D.C. And just 3 years ago, in the wake of a terrible tragedy in Orlando, shared healing from the nation's capital.
Tonight, as we light these candles, let our love be illuminating.
Augustana spearheaded a gathering at DuPont Circle to remember the 49 mostly gay men who died in the mass shooting at Pulse nightclub in 2016. Today, Augustana is a microcosm of the world as many wish it could be. Blacks, whites, old, young, families, singles, straight, gay, all worshiping together.